Some encounters stay with people for the rest of their lives. A figure standing beside a lonely road, a creature with eyes that looked almost human, and a stretch of silent woods where something unseen may have been watching. Tonight, three witnesses share experiences they still can't explain. Whether these encounters involved unknown animals, misunderstood events, or something far stranger is up to you to decide. Emma thought she saw a man standing beside the road until it turned its head. The person who shared the story wanted to remain anonymous, so we're going to call her Emma for the sake of the story. Emma had always considered herself spiritually sensitive. Growing up in the southern foothills, strange experiences seemed to follow her from childhood. Unexplained encounters, unusual feelings, and moments she could never quite rationalize had become part of her life. For years, one particular incident remained buried among those memories. A night she couldn't explain, and a creature she had never been able to identify. It wasn't until years later that everything changed. One evening, Emma was reading a book about folklore and the traditions of southern Appalachia. The book explored regional beliefs, folk beliefs, and strange creatures said to roam the mountains. As she reached a section discussing cryptids, two words immediately caught her attention: Dogman. The moment she read the name, a chill ran through her. She knew exactly what it was describing, because years earlier, she believed she had seen one. At the time, Emma was around 17 years old. Like many teenagers who had just gotten their driver's license, freedom meant staying out late whenever she could. She lived in a small rural community roughly 10 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by forests and winding backroads. Her mother usually asked her to be home before midnight, but if the lights were off and everyone had gone to bed, Emma often took her time coming home. The night of the encounter felt completely normal. She drove into town, she grabbed a late night snack, and she sat in a parking lot listening to music while she ate. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. Eventually, she started to drive back home. Once she left town and crossed the railroad tracks, the road narrowed into a quiet country highway, lined with miles of dense woods. Small side roads disappeared into the trees, leading into homes hidden deep in the forest. There was one section of road Emma especially loved. The trees had been cleared from a stretch of land roughly half a mile long, creating an open field with an unobstructed view of the night sky. She would occasionally pull over there just to look at the stars. She didn't stop that night, but as she approached the clearing, she slowed her car slightly to admire the sky while driving. That's when she noticed something standing ahead. At first, she assumed someone had broken down along the road. It wasn't uncommon. Her own vehicle had given her trouble on that same road before. As she rounded the curve, however, she realized there was no car, only a figure. She continued moving at roughly 30 miles per hour. At first glance, it looked like a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a heather gray hoodie. But something wasn't right. The gray seemed to cover everything, its arms, its hands, and then she noticed the dark claws hanging at its side. Emma's heart immediately dropped. The figure stood completely motionless near the edge of the field. Its posture was slightly hunched, almost unnatural, and it remained perfectly still as she approached. Finally, she looked at its face. What she saw has stayed with her ever since. It wasn't human. It looked like the face of a coyote, not simply resembling one, but unmistakably canine. And it wasn't staring into the distance. It was watching her drive past. The moment her brain finally accepted what she was seeing, panic took over. Emma snapped her eyes back to the road, pressed down on the accelerator, and began shouting in disbelief as her car sped into the darkness. She checked the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. Whether it had moved or simply disappeared into the night, she couldn't tell. But she didn't slow down for the rest of the drive home. She pulled into her driveway as quickly as possible. She rushed up the steps, ran through the house, and burst into her mother's room. She woke her up immediately. Still terrified, Emma explained everything: the tall figure, the coyote-like face, the fact that it had been standing upright beside the road. At 17, she knew very little about cryptids. The only explanation she had ever heard that seemed remotely similar was the idea of a skinwalker. That possibility terrified her. She had heard stories before, and she thought that she had seen something so clearly, so vividly, left her convinced that something terrible might happen. She cried as she told her mother what she'd seen. The fear stayed with her long after that night. For months, she refused to go outside after dark. Driving alone became difficult. Even now, years later, back roads at night still make her nervous. She still remembers every detail: the gray body, the claws, that hunched posture, and the coyote face staring directly at her from the roadside. Years later, while reading about Appalachian folklore, she finally discovered that others had reported seeing creatures remarkably similar to what she had encountered. Whether it was a cryptid, an unknown animal, or something that simply cannot be explained, Emma still considers it one of the most vivid and unforgettable experiences of her life. And to this day, whenever she drives a lonely back road at night, she can't help but wonder whether something might still be standing just beyond the edge of the headlights. So, if you have any ideas of what Emma may have seen on that Alabama road, please leave it in the comments. I'm going to be sharing this with her. She thought she was looking at a dog until it looked back at her with human eyes. The person who shared the story wanted to use her social media handle Velveteendeer. We're going to call her Dee for the story. This happened in Gaylord, Michigan. Dee had lived there her entire life. The roads and wildlife were familiar to her, and the route she took home was one she took countless times. Nothing about this night should have been unusual. It was about 9:45 p.m. and completely dark outside. She was walking home from work and talking to her boyfriend on the phone. They were having a normal conversation, and she made her way down the same road as she usually used. She passed a church along the way, and something moved in the distance and caught her attention. At first, she couldn't make out exactly what she was seeing. All she knew was something was sprinting across the ground on all fours. Her first thought that it might be a person made her uncomfortable, but within a second or two, she realized whatever she was watching didn't move like a human being at all. It was far too low to the ground. It was incredibly fast, and the movement itself felt extremely animalistic. She tried to rationalize it. While still on the phone with her boyfriend, she mentioned that there was something running nearby, quickly followed by saying it was probably just a dog. That was the only explanation that made sense. But even after saying it out loud, she felt uneasy. Something about it didn't feel right. She continued walking toward the area where she had seen it and pulled out a taser and flashlight. She started shining the light around, hoping to get a better look to confirm that it was an animal. For several seconds, she saw absolutely nothing, and somehow that made it worse. She knew she had seen something there. Then she found it again. The creature was underneath one of the church entrances, partially hidden in the darkness. The first thing that struck her was its posture. It wasn't sitting like a dog. It wasn't lying down. It appeared to be crouched, extremely low to the ground, almost as though it was squatting or hunching over itself in a tense, unnatural position. Without really thinking about it, Dee slowed down. Part of her simply needed to understand what she was looking at. As she got a better look, the details became clearer. The body looked wrong. The skin appeared fleshy, almost like a human skin instead of fur. There was really no hair except for some patchy, thin hair. It didn't seem like the healthy coat of an animal. But the face was what truly disturbed her. Even now, she struggles to explain exactly what she saw. She doesn't know whether it was the lighting, the angle, or the appearance of it, the creature itself, but the face appeared disturbingly human. Not completely human, not enough to mistake it for a person, but human enough that her brain couldn't process it as a normal animal. She didn't see a snout or ears that looked, nothing that looked like deer or bear ears. She didn't remember seeing any ears at all, or a tail, and the eyes looked human. And they looked directly at her, and that was the moment everything changed. As soon as the creature made eye contact, panic took over. She immediately turned and began running as fast as she could. She was still on the phone with her boyfriend, trying to explain what had just happened, but she was out of breath, terrified. She was looking back and probably wasn't making much sense, and she only remembers repeating something wasn't right. After putting distance between herself and the church, she still didn't feel safe. She was afraid that if she completely turned her back now, the creature might follow her. So she actually turned around and began walking backwards for part of the way home, keeping her flashlight aimed toward the area where she had seen it. She watched constantly. She was genuinely afraid it would come after her. It never did. But she never trusted it enough to stop looking. Dee has lived in Gaylord her entire life. She's seen dogs, coyotes, wildlife moving through the woods, animal crossing the road at night. but she's never seen anything that looked like this. Since that night, she's tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a sick animal, maybe it had mange. That might explain the patchy fur, but even that explanation doesn't fully account for what she saw: the way it moved, the way it crouched, the human like eyes, the absence of a snout, the lack of visible ears, the fact that it seemed almost human when it looked directly at her. Whatever she saw outside the church that night didn't feel normal. And years later, one question still bothers her. If it was just an animal, why did it look so human when it looked back at her? And what do you think it was that Dee saw that night in Michigan? Was this the Dogman, or was it something else? Please leave your comments and thoughts in the comment section, because I'll be sharing this with Dee. Scott spent years investigating the paranormal. He thought he'd left all that behind, but during a simple hike in the mountains of Georgia, he and his wife experienced three things they still can't explain: a tree knock deep in the woods, something heavy crashing just off the trail, and a powerful sulfur smell that appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Years later, Scott isn't claiming it was Bigfoot, but he also can't explain what happened that afternoon at Cloudland Canyon. So Scott has a channel. It's not at Knox Paranormal, and I will link it below. And this is Scott's story. For years, Scott had lived in a world where strange things happened. Long before he ever considered the possibility of Bigfoot, he spent years investigating the paranormal. He founded a local investigation team that became well known throughout his area, appearing in newspapers and local radio interviews. But after several experiences that affected him deeply, he eventually stepped away from paranormal investigations, at least officially. Because once you've spent years exploring things that don't fit neatly into the ordinary world, you never completely stop looking. Years later, Scott and his wife developed a simple hobby. They loved to hike. Most weekends they would pick a state park within a few hours of home, drive there, and spend the day exploring the trails they had never seen before. Occasionally they would joke about Bigfoot while walking through remote forests. What if there were Bigfoot here? Most of the time, it was nothing more than just conversation. They watched documentaries. They read articles. They found the subject fascinating, but neither of them really considered themselves investigators. They weren't looking for evidence. They were simply hikers. That changed during a trip to Cloudland Canyon State Park near Trenton, Georgia. The couple arrived around 2 in the afternoon. Almost immediately, they discovered the trail system was surprisingly difficult to navigate, even with maps. They spent nearly an hour trying to figure out exactly where they wanted to go. Eventually, they chose the Bear Creek Backcountry Trail. By the time they started hiking, it was after 3 o'clock. Most visitors appeared to be staying near the picnic areas and main park grounds. Once Scott and his wife entered the backcountry trail, they encountered very few people. One group near the beginning, another near the end. For most of the hike, they were completely alone. As they moved deeper into the forest, Scott began noticing something unusual. The silence, not the peaceful kind. The woods felt empty. There were very few birds, no obvious squirrel activity, no constant background noise that normally fills the forest. Just quiet. And as they walked and talked, a loud crack suddenly echoed from the woods to their left. It sounded exactly like something striking a tree. The sound came from a distance, but it was sharp and distinct. Scott stopped. He looked toward the trees and half-jokingly said something to his wife. That actually sounded like a tree knock. The two laughed it off. At the time, it seemed ridiculous. They continued down the trail. About 20 minutes later, something happened that neither of them could easily explain. Off the trail to their left, perhaps 20 feet into the woods, they heard something heavy crash down through the leaves and brush. The sound was sudden and violent. It almost sounded as though something large had jumped from a tree and landed on the forest floor. Both of them jumped. The noise was much closer than the earlier knock. Scott immediately began trying to explain it away. Maybe a large branch had fallen. Maybe a deer had moved through the brush. Maybe some dead limb had finally broken loose. But whatever caused the sound had enough weight behind it to make both of them stop cold. They stood there for several minutes. scanning the woods. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. No animals. There were no people coming down the trail. No explanation at all. For the first time that afternoon, both of them felt genuinely uneasy. Their conversation became quieter. Eventually, they stopped talking altogether. The forest around them somehow felt different. As they continued along the trail, they reached an intersection and decided to keep going toward a pond farther ahead. Then came the smell. Both of them noticed it immediately. Rotten eggs, strong sulfur. The odor seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was powerful enough that both immediately commented on it. "Do you smell that?" "It smells like sulfur." They stopped again. Scott searched the area. There were no visible springs, no standing water, no obvious source, just woods. The smell lingered around them as they stood there trying to understand where it was coming from. Given the strange events that had already happened and Scott's history with the paranormal, an old thought surfaced in his mind. Half serious and half joking, he turned to his wife and said, "That's what demons smell like." Many years of investigating strange experiences had taught him that sulfur was often associated with certain reports of negative paranormal encounters. At that moment, standing alone in those silent woods, the smell unsettled him. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. The couple continued toward the pond. When they finally arrived, they sat down to rest briefly and discuss everything that had happened. The sounds, the silence, the smell. None of it made sense. After their break, they retraced their exact route back. And that's when they realized something even stranger. The sulfur smell never returned, not once. They passed through the same area where the odor had been overwhelming only an hour earlier. But now there was nothing, no smell, no explanation. During the 3-hour drive home, Scott and his wife continued talking about the events of that afternoon. The tree knock, the heavy crash, the strange silence, the sulfur odor. Individually, each experience could perhaps be explained away. Together, they felt different. The couple had both heard reports describing unusual smells associated with Bigfoot encounters. They knew about tree knocks. They knew witnesses sometimes described an overwhelming sense of unease, but they also knew that people often jumped to conclusions. Scott wasn't interested in claiming they had encountered a Bigfoot. In fact, he resisted the idea. He understood how easily the mind can connect unrelated events. Yet years later, one question still remained. Was it all a simple coincidence? Or for a brief moment on a quiet trail in Cloudland Canyon, did they unknowingly walk through the territory of something hidden in those woods? Scott still doesn't claim to know the answer, but he has never forgotten that strange afternoon in the Georgia mountains. So what do you think Scott encountered that day in Cloudland Canyon? You should leave your thoughts and comments for Scott and go follow him at Knox Paranormal. Like I said, I'll link his account in the description. He has a YouTube channel and he has a lot of great videos on it, and he was kind enough to let me share this story, so please at least go check him out. 3 different witnesses, 3 different locations, and 3 experiences that continue to raise more questions than answers. Emma described a tall, canine-faced figure standing beside an empty Alabama road. Dee encountered something outside a church that appeared almost human, yet clearly wasn't. And Scott and his wife experienced strange sounds, unusual silence, and an unexplained odor deep within the woods of Cloudland Canyon. Could these encounters be explained by misidentified wildlife, unusual environmental conditions, or the effect of fear and darkness? Were they simply coincidences that our minds naturally try to connect into something larger? Or do these stories point towards something that remains undiscovered? Many people who report encounters like these describe similar details: human-like eyes, unnatural movements, strange sounds, overwhelming feelings of unease, and experiences that stay vivid for years afterwards. Of course, these stories are shared for entertainment purposes, and every listener should draw their own conclusions. The accounts in this video are presented as they were experienced and remembered by the individuals involved. But now we'd like to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? Do you think these witnesses encountered misidentified animals, unknown creatures, or something else entirely? Leave your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you don't miss future encounters shared after dark. And until next time, keep your eyes on the road, stay aware of the woods around you, and remember, sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones we never forget.